My wife threatened to frame me for abuse. Then I caught her cheating on camera. I never expected a tiny wild rabbit to be the catalyst for so much tension in my family. But sometimes, it's the simplest events that unravel our assumptions about who we are and how we live. My name is Mark, I'm 35 years old, and I've been married to Jenna for almost 10 years. We live on the outskirts of a small town in Montana, where I work remotely in IT, and Jenna stays home to care for our two kids, Logan, who's 5, and Mia, who's 4. Life in our rural community is generally peaceful. The kids have plenty of space to run around and explore, and we don't have to worry too much about big city chaos. However, living close to nature comes with its own set of challenges. Hawks, foxes, and other predators are a common sight in our area. We're used to warning the kids about not wandering off alone and keeping an eye on our small pets. A few weeks ago, Logan and Mia burst into the house one afternoon, their excited voices echoing through the living room. They were cupping their hands together, giggling and practically bouncing with excitement. "Dad, look what we found!" Mia exclaimed, eyes bright. They slowly opened their hands to reveal a tiny wild rabbit, trembling a bit but appearing otherwise okay. "Can we keep him?" Logan pleaded, giving me that look, big, hopeful eyes that no parent can easily resist. I gently explained that wild rabbits don't adapt well to living indoors or in a cage, and also that we already had enough pets to care for. I added that this little bunny likely had a family somewhere nearby. Logan and Mia looked disappointed, but after some coaxing, they agreed we had to set it free. Since I was in the middle of work, I couldn't leave the house just then. "Jenna," I said, glancing at her, "do you mind taking the rabbit a little way out? Maybe near the bushes by the fence line? That spot is safer from hawks and foxes." Jenna shrugged, not looking particularly enthused. "Sure," she said flatly, as though doing me a minor favor. She told the kids to put the rabbit in a shoebox, and off they went. I returned to my computer, relieved that everything was sorted out. The kids love animals, and I really didn't want them to see anything upsetting. Living in the country, they've grown up with the reality of predators, but I still try to shield them from the more brutal side of nature whenever I can. But I should have followed them. I should have double-checked that Jenna actually released the rabbit where I'd asked. Because 15 minutes later, both Logan and Mia came running back into the house in tears, and everything changed. The next moments would throw our entire family dynamic into question, over something as seemingly simple as a small, scared rabbit. A few minutes after I'd gone back to work, I heard the front door slam and the unmistakable sounds of my children sobbing. At first, I thought they'd maybe tripped and skinned a knee or gotten into one of those small sibling fights. But when I looked up, both Logan and Mia were standing in the doorway to my home office, tears streaming down their cheeks, clutching each other for comfort. "What happened?" I asked, alarmed by the intensity of their crying. Mia, red-eyed and trembling, could barely form her words. "A hawk," she began, her voice shaky. "Mom told us to put the bunny in the middle of the yard," Logan blurted, rubbing his nose with the back of his hand. "It was just sitting there, and then this big hawk swooped down." The horror in his eyes tore at me. I felt a jolt of anger rising in my gut as I tried to make sense of it. "Wait," I said slowly. "Mom had you release the rabbit in the open?" They both nodded, sniffling, and Mia whispered, "It screamed, Daddy." The bunny screamed. My wife, Jenna, strolled in right behind them, looking more annoyed than upset. "Can we not make this a big deal?" she sighed, rolling her eyes. "They're acting like it's the end of the world, but it's just nature. Hawks eat rabbits all the time." I stared at her, struggling to keep my voice steady. "I specifically asked you to let it go in the bushes. That's where it would have at least had a chance." She just shrugged, crossing her arms. "It wouldn't have mattered. Something was going to get it eventually. It's a wild animal, Mark." Both kids were inconsolable. Mia clung to my leg, sobbing, "Mommy killed the bunny," while Logan glared at Jenna, tears still rolling down his cheeks. "You're the rabbit killer," he said bluntly, anger flickering in his eyes. Jenna pressed her lips into a thin line, clearly irritated. "They're just being dramatic," she insisted, refusing to even look at them. "They'll get over it soon enough." But the kids weren't getting over it. By dinner time, They refused to sit next to their mother, ignoring every attempt she made to speak to them. Every time she tried to offer them food or help them with something, they shot back with the same accusation. "You're a rabbit killer." I found myself torn between trying to soothe the children and holding back my own frustration at Jenna. Sure, accidents happen, but she'd flat out ignored my instructions and then acted like it was no big deal that our children had witnessed a gruesome, traumatic sight. That night, once the kids were in bed and still refusing to say goodnight to her, I confronted Jenna privately. "Why couldn't you just do what I asked? You knew about the Hawks." She rolled her eyes again, flipping through her phone. "I don't need you micromanaging me. Plus, you're supposed to support me, not join their little protest." My anger flared. "Support you? You just caused our kids to watch a helpless animal get torn apart right in front of them. And now you're basically saying it's their problem for not getting over it. How can I support that?" She slammed her phone down on the table. "Fine, Mark. Take their side. I'm obviously the villain here," she snapped sarcastically, then stormed off to the bedroom, slamming the door behind her. I stood there, caught between concern for my kids' emotional distress and frustration with my wife's callousness. It had started with a small wild rabbit, but the ripple effect on our family was already enormous. I had no clue that this was only the beginning of a much deeper rift forming beneath our roof. For the next few days after the rabbit incident, my wife, Jenna, barely spoke to me at all. It was like a switch had flipped. One moment, she was annoyed but still engaging in arguments. The next, she'd fallen into a cold silence. Every time I tried to address the tension simmering between us, ask if we could talk things out, she either shrugged or turned her back as though I'd said nothing. The kids, meanwhile, remained resolute in their anger. Logan and Mia refused to sit with her at meal times, casting sidelong glances and whispering to each other whenever she entered the room. If Jenna approached them for any reason, like asking if they wanted a snack or needed help with something, they'd just shake their heads and mutter, "No, thanks," before stalking off. Their usual playfulness had vanished, replaced by a guarded wariness that broke my heart every time I witnessed it. Jenna's stance? She expected me to somehow fix the kids' feelings. She wanted me to tell them they were wrong for being upset, and that they should simply forget about the rabbit. But as a father, I couldn't do that. They were traumatized by what they had seen, and I believed they had a right to process it in their own time. 2 weeks dragged on in this suffocating tension. My wife and I spoke only when absolutely necessary, logistics about groceries, who would drive the kids to daycare, what time I'd be home from work. Every conversation was brief and tinged with resentment on both sides. I was torn between anger at her apparent indifference and a growing desire for peace in our household. Then, one night, out of the blue, Jenna walked into the living room where I was reading to Logan and Mia. She hovered awkwardly before saying, "I might have overreacted about the whole thing." Her voice was subdued, almost apologetic. I looked at her, feeling a glimmer of hope. Maybe she was finally ready to acknowledge her role in this mess. Logan and Mia exchanged uncertain glances, but neither spoke. After the kids went to bed, Jenna and I sat down at the kitchen table. In a quiet tone, she admitted she shouldn't have brushed off my concerns about the Hawks. She even said she was sorry the kids had to see something so brutal. For a moment, it felt like a step forward, a chance to heal and move on. Encouraged, I tried to broker a truce. "Let's just talk to them together," I suggested. "If they see us working through this calmly, it might help." She nodded, looking genuinely contrite. So I began to think we could put the ordeal behind us. The tension lifted ever so slightly, like the promise of sunlight after a long storm. But that promise was shattered the very next day. It was Mia who came to me. She tugged at my sleeve while I was finishing up a work call in my home office. Her eyes were wide and worried, as though she was debating whether to speak. Finally, she whispered, "Daddy, I have to tell you something, but you have to promise not to get mad." I knelt down to her level, bracing myself. "What is it, sweetheart?" "It's about Mommy," she said, her voice trembling. "When you go to work on Saturdays, she brings a man here. She calls him her special friend." My heart plummeted into my stomach. Shock and confusion crashed over me in equal measure. Mia explained that Jenna told both kids to keep it a secret. She said you'd be really mad if you found out, my daughter confessed, looking frightened. Anger, sadness, and disbelief swirled inside me, forming a storm of emotions I could barely contain. I wanted to believe Mia had misunderstood, but I also knew she had no reason to lie. My throat felt tight. I realized then that the rabbit's death was only the tip of a much deeper iceberg, and our family issues ran far darker than a single act of callousness. Learning that my wife, Jenna, might be cheating was one thing, but hearing it from my 4-year-old daughter was something else entirely. I felt equal parts of anger, hurt, and a strange numbness settle over me. Still, I tried to keep calm. I thanked Mia for telling me, then sent both kids out to play so I could gather my thoughts. I knew I needed more than just my child's word. This was serious, and if I confronted Jenna without any proof, she'd likely deny it and spin the situation however she wanted. So I took a step I never thought I'd take in my own home. I decided to install hidden cameras. We live in a rural area, and home security isn't unusual. People here often set up cameras to watch for trespassers or local wildlife that might get into gardens or chicken coops. But my intention was different. I ordered a small set of high-definition cameras online, requesting discreet packaging delivered to my work address so Jenna wouldn't suspect a thing. Over the weekend, I waited until Jenna left for a girls' night out with her old college friends, which conveniently happened to be a regular Saturday activity. While she was gone, I set up the cameras in strategic spots, one covering the living room, one in the kitchen, and one in the hallway that led to our bedroom and the kids' rooms. I angled them carefully to avoid being obvious. If she or anyone else checked, they'd look like standard security fixtures. When Monday rolled around, I was both terrified and relieved to see the motion sensor alerts pop up on my phone. Jenna was hosting someone in our home during my work hours, exactly the scenario Mia had described. My heart pounded as I checked the camera feeds from my office computer. Sure enough, there was a man I'd never seen before, probably early 30s, entering through the back door. Jenna greeted him with an embrace that left no doubt they were more than friends. My mind reeled. Every emotion, anger, betrayal, sadness, hit me all at once. But it got worse. As I continued recording the clips, I discovered that Jenna and her friend didn't just engage in a standard affair. They spoke openly about her pregnancy. At first, I was confused. Was it my baby she was talking about? But the conversation made it clear. The child wasn't mine. She'd known about the pregnancy for some time and hadn't told me. They were actually discussing whether she should pass the baby off as mine or leave me altogether. My stomach twisted. She was planning an entire alternate future, complete with lies to our children about who their real father was. And if that wasn't bad enough, she made the kids lie to me already, saying things like, "Make sure you don't tell Daddy about our friend. He'll be mad." In the videos, she confessed to the lover that she was tired of our boring family life and that she only stayed with me because I offered financial stability. Hearing her say that while recalling her casual, heartless reaction to the rabbit's death suddenly made sense. She truly didn't care about how her actions hurt our children or me. When I watched the recordings, especially the part about her discussing a pregnancy that obviously wasn't mine, something inside me finally snapped. I knew there was no salvaging our marriage. I'd been clinging to the hope that maybe we could fix whatever issues we had, but these clips erased that possibility. The next step was both inevitable and excruciating. I had to gather every shred of evidence and prepare for the hardest fight of my life, one that would unravel the world I'd built with Jenna, but also protect me and my kids from further heartbreak. After spending hours staring in shock at the camera footage, I knew I couldn't keep it all to myself. First, I needed someone I trusted, someone objective yet supportive, to help me figure out my next steps. So I called my sister, Madison. She's a bit older than me, and we've always had each other's backs. When she arrived at my house, I ushered her into my home office, locked the door, and showed her the clips I'd saved. It was clear from the moment she started watching that Madison wasn't entirely surprised. "I had my suspicions," she murmured, shaking her head. "I noticed Jenna acting strange months ago. I even saw her once, at some local bar, giggling a little too closely with a guy I didn't recognize. But I wasn't sure how to bring it up." Seeing the raw evidence, Jenna greeting a man who wasn't me, the conversations about her pregnancy, The open talk of deception seemed to confirm every gut feeling my sister had. Watching her eyes move from the screen to my face, filled with sympathy, made me realize just how deep my hurt ran. "This is bad, Mark," she said quietly. "Real bad." I nodded, swallowing the lump in my throat. "I need more proof," I told her, "just in case Jenna tries to twist this around." So I took it a step further. I purchased a GPS tracker and discreetly placed it in the trunk of Jenna's car. Madison helped me sync it to my phone so that I could see exactly where Jenna went on weekends or evenings when she claimed to be out with friends. Sure enough, the little ping on the map never went anywhere near the diner she always mentioned. It led to an address on the far side of town, the same place her lover lived. Armed with this additional proof, I confronted Jenna one evening when the kids were at their grandparents'. At first, she looked stunned that I knew so much. Then her shock morphed into a chilling sort of anger, like she was cornered but still dangerous. "You had no right to spy on me," she exploded, jabbing her finger at my chest. "Do you have any idea how this makes you look?" My jaw clenched, but I refused to back down. "I found out you're pregnant by another man," I said, my voice measured. "You've been lying to me and making our kids keep secrets. Don't try to make me the bad guy here." Her face twisted. She realized I wasn't going to crumble. That's when she spat out the words I never expected from someone I'd once loved so deeply. "If you so much as say one word about this to anyone," she snarled, "I'll tell the police you've been hitting me, and they'll believe me." In that moment, it felt like the final nail in the coffin. Any lingering doubts or hopes I had for salvaging our marriage evaporated. I saw her for who she really was, a person willing to lie about domestic violence to save herself. I took a step back, my hands trembling at my sides. "You do whatever you need to do," I said, my voice eerily calm. "But I'm done. We're done." As soon as she stormed out, I called an attorney I'd been recommended by a friend, a tough, no-nonsense divorce lawyer known for handling cases where betrayal and lies took center stage. By the time Jenna had slammed the door and sped off in her car, I was already on the phone, arranging a consultation. "That's more than enough," the lawyer told me after I explained the camera footage, the GPS tracking, and her threats. "In our state, adultery and false accusations can have major consequences in family court. We'll start drafting the divorce papers immediately." I hung up, feeling a peculiar mix of relief and sorrow wash over me. My marriage, once built on love and trust, had become a battleground of deceit, pregnancy by another man, and threats of false domestic violence accusations. If this was who Jenna had become, or maybe who she'd always been, then I had no choice but to fight back, for my own sake and for our kids. There was no turning back now. The process of ending our marriage had begun. The tension reached a boiling point one Thursday afternoon when Jenna decided to go through with her threat. I was in my home office finishing up a video meeting when I heard her raised voice from the living room. My gut churned, recognizing the familiar, frantic tone she had adopted lately. Suddenly, the front door flew open, and two police officers stepped inside, hands on their holsters. Jenna appeared right behind them, tears streaming down her cheeks in an almost theatrical display. "He's in there," she cried, pointing in my direction. "He's been hitting me, and I'm afraid for my life." My heart pounded. For a split second, I feared the officers would tackle me, handcuff me on the spot. Her performance was that convincing, but I forced myself to remain calm, raising my hands slowly. "Officers," I said quietly, "please come in. There's camera footage you need to see." Jenna froze. Her eyes darted from me to the officers, then back again. She had forgotten, or underestimated, our home security cameras. She continued to sob, though her voice wavered. "He's lying," she insisted, trying to keep up the facade. "He's just trying to twist everything." One officer turned to her. "Ma'am, let's see the evidence he's mentioning. If he's lying, we'll deal with that. But we have to check." My hands still trembling, I led them to our living room TV, where I pulled up the archive security footage. Over the past few weeks, I'd meticulously saved every clip that seemed relevant, especially the one from that day. The screen flickered to life, showing Jenna in the hallway, phone clutched in her hand, practicing her sobs and ranting about how she'd ruined me. The audio captured every word. "I'll tell them he's been hitting me for weeks. They'll arrest him. No question." A hush fell over the room. The second officer, who had been standing with his arms folded, uncrossed them. Jenna's tears suddenly dried up. She looked at the screen, then back at me, panic seizing her face. That's taken out of context," she stammered, trying to regain control. "He's editing the footage, making me look bad." But the footage continued, showing a clear timeline, including timestamps that left no doubt it was unaltered. There was no room for misinterpretation. Every angle, every word, painted the truth. Her 911 call was deliberately fabricated. The officers exchanged glances, and I could almost feel the tide turn. One stepped forward, speaking in a calm but stern voice. "Ma'am, you're under arrest for filing a false police report." Her eyes went wide as she realized there was no escape. She started screaming, insisting it was all some elaborate setup. But the evidence was ironclad, and the officers led her out in handcuffs. Even at the doorway, she shrieked accusations that she was the victim, but no one was buying it anymore. The aftermath was swift. Jenna's parents, already blindsided by the cheating revelations, found out about her false accusations. They were mortified. When they saw the footage, her mother pressed her lips together in grim disappointment. Her father, a man who'd always been stoic, simply shook his head. "We can't stand by you if you're going to do something like this," he said, voice heavy with sorrow. "This is beyond any excuse." The day of her arrest was effectively the last day Jenna had any meaningful support. Relatives and friends who'd once sympathized with her turned away. The story spread through our small community faster than I anticipated. By the end of the week, she had been thoroughly ostracized. I never took pleasure in her downfall, but I couldn't deny the relief that came with the truth being so undeniable. Our marriage was over, but at least the lies that threatened to destroy me were exposed, and she was left to face the consequences she'd earned. After months of legal wrangling, I finally stood before a judge with all the evidence laid out. The camera footage of Jenna's cheating, her false accusations, and the patterns of neglect toward our children. It was surreal, watching her sit across the courtroom with her lawyer, still trying to salvage her image while knowing she'd lost all credibility. In the end, the court ruled decisively in my favor. I was granted full custody of Liam and Mia, while Jenna received only minimal spousal support, a small sum that paled in comparison to what she might have received had she not been caught in so many lies. The house, where so many of our memories were formed, became solely mine. No one even contested it, given the overwhelming evidence of her betrayal and the state's strong stance on adultery. A few weeks later, Jenna packed her belongings and left town with her lover. Rumor had it, they ended up in a rented apartment 2 states over. I heard bits and pieces through mutual acquaintances, enough to know she tried to reinvent herself, proclaiming a fresh start. Not many people bought into that narrative. When I learned she was pregnant, it didn't take a genius to figure out the baby wasn't mine. Initially, she tried to cast doubt, but with everything out in the open, there was no use pretending. She and her lover hoped to start a new family together, until the reality of parenthood, financial strains, and the fallout from her reputation became too much. By the time her child was born, her lover had already walked out on her. It was one of those strange, bittersweet moments. Despite everything, I felt a pang of pity. She chased a fantasy, sacrificing her marriage and risking her relationships with her own kids, only to be left alone. But pity was all I felt. The anger and heartbreak had burned out long ago. Back home, I focused on rebuilding my life. With Liam and Mia, I established new routines, a healthier rhythm that didn't revolve around constant tension. They started to smile more and talk more about the future. We even got a small rescue dog, and the kids loved taking care of it, learning the gentle lesson of responsibility that the unfortunate rabbit situation had failed to provide. Speaking of the rabbit, I couldn't help but reflect on how that tiny creature became the catalyst that tore down the facade of my marriage. It was, in many ways, a symbol of the entire mess. A fragile life treated with carelessness, leading to a harsh and brutal reality. What began as a small sign of neglect on my wife's part turned out to be the tip of an iceberg of betrayal. Sometimes, I lie awake at night, remembering the hawk swooping down on that helpless bunny and how it mirrored the swift downfall of our marriage once the truth started to emerge. Deceit and betrayal might remain hidden for a while, but eventually, they come crashing into the light of day, just like that hawk, swift and unstoppable. Now, as I sit on the porch with my children playing in the yard, under my watchful eye, of course, I feel an overwhelming sense of relief. The chaos, the lies, and the anger that once weighed me down are gone. I used to think my marriage would last forever, that love could conquer any challenge. But the lesson I've learned is that no bond survives infidelity and deception for long. In the end, betrayal and dishonesty will devour even the strongest relationships, just as surely as a hawk will catch its prey in an open field. And when you see that lesson unfold so vividly in your own life, you never forget it.